Welcome to the Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on the Alignment Show. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it might be in your part of the world. Welcome. Started it up again. Sorry about that. Welcome once again to the Alignment Show. I am Don King. I'll be your host. And as we're getting started today, I want to remind folks that this is, I don't guess it's the last week, but it's really closing in on the time that you have to sign up for SalesWise Live. If you have an interest in that, I've got the QR code on the screen for folks who are joining us via video, and we'll have the link in the show notes. Remember, this is a real opportunity to work with people like Bob Berg, Jeff West, Kim Angeli. These are folks who are oriented towards sales as service. There's no manipulation involved in their approach. In fact, it's based on the principles of the go-giver. And I think of it as just being the feel-good way of serving people. So this would be a game changer for your career, whether you're in direct sales or not. If you're in any kind of business, this is a good investment. Now, this is, I forget the dates, but it's in early June. So it is coming to a close. As an ongoing thing, you might want to consider the Go-Giver Success Alliance. This is a very small investment each month to be able to be part of an encouraging group that's truly built on principles of the go-giver. I encourage you to look into that. Whether you're going to go with it or not, check it out. It's worth knowing about this community. And finally, this show is sponsored always by my books. Got a couple of them out there right now. There's 3 more that are in progress. And so you might want to just keep track of where you can find those books. The latest one is Medium Well, which you see up above my shoulder. But the book writing continues. And so all of them are aimed at supporting the values of this show, which after all is about living your values to value your life. That's what our books are about, and that's what our guests are all about. And so I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce you to somebody I've been getting to know over the last year or so. I met Channie Marston through Toastmasters. And as we've had conversations, she has really impressed me as a person, as a business person, as a community person. I don't usually read the whole bio for the guests coming on, but it's just so fascinating to me what I'm reading about Channie. Now, her name officially is Cheyenne. And that's a lovely name in and of itself, but she's known as Channie to her best friends and closest family. And that's how I know her. So she has a diverse background with many unexpected roles and interests that lend to her ability to research, write, speak, consult, teach, and lead. Her most recent business ventures have landed her in a partnership. Now think about how these two go together. The ever-changing field of cybersecurity, as well as elder care management and advocating. Her past career paths have included more than 30 years in healthcare, as well as the ownership of a small vegetable production company. She is a writer, the author of a cookbook called Love and Butter. I just love that title. Some of the hobbies and activities that keep Cheyenne motivated and inspired include being a distance cyclist, shooting a compound bow, hiking, kayaking, and cooking. She is a mother of 3 and has 6 adorable grandbabies, 2 worthless cats, and a derpy hunting dog who is afraid of gunshots. You see what I mean about the fascination here. She currently resides in East Tennessee, loves caring for her huge herb garden and edible landscape, and is spending her free time focusing on writing both a children's book and one geared towards addressing the needs of the elderly. Now, as a multi-potentialite myself, I really relate to all of these things. So I'm looking forward to this conversation with Channie Marston. Let's bring on Channie. Channie, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about today.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to start with a really minor thing here because I know you get called Chaney and just all kinds of different things. Suddenly, I'm not sure I'm saying it right. Is it Shanny or Channy?
It's Channie with an SH.
Shanny.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
because it's based on Cheyenne.
It is. So when I was born, one of my older brothers could not say Cheyenne. He said Shan, and that got changed to Shanny. And just to give you an idea of where I came from, my town was so small that the entire town called me Shanny. In fact, my school records did not say Cheyenne. They said Shanny.
Oh my. And that's, I'm always interested in people's names. So you mentioned the small town that you came from. You come from Native American heritage, I believe. Am I right about that?
I do. And actually my small town, if you're an Eagles fan, standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona, which sits right on the border of the Navajo Nation. Yes. So
Hmm.
a lot of my growing up years were spent on the res, as we call it lovingly, in that area of the world. The Four Corners area. If you've ever been there, that's pretty much where it is.
Okay. And so you and I have had conversations, and of course the audience has not heard those. So we're going to cover some of the same ground. I can't remember, though, from our conversations, what brought you to East Tennessee. I know you didn't just stay there in the Four Corners area. You've lived in various places.
I have. My career luckily has taken me all over the country, mostly in the West. I lived for right after I graduated from therapy school, California, and then I lived for several years, almost a decade in Denver. But ultimately, I ended up in Illinois. I took a job there that I really just thought would be a stepping stone to something else, and ended up staying in central Illinois around the Springfield area, which is very centralized to the state because the state is super long.
Hmm.
But I ended up staying there for almost 20 years. And then when my husband and I were looking for a place to retire, we kept coming back to Tennessee, the idea of Tennessee. And we both made a list. We looked at everything on our list, and there was just so much to love about this state and this area. And probably a little known fact is Maryville specifically was on AARP's top 10 places to retire for, I don't know, 10 years in a row or something. So we just kept looking at it and visiting here and coming back, and we would plan our vacations around the farmers market, both in Maryville and in Knoxville. We planned it around being able to tour the schools. We planned it around things that were happening in Gatlinburg. So just finally we made that jump. There was just a lot to like about it.
And that makes sense. That makes sense. How long have you been in the area at this point?
5 years, just
Five
over 5.
years. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so I don't have a real good sense of time anyway. And for all I knew, you had just moved here when you joined Toastmasters. So there's so much to dig into here. You spent much of a career in healthcare. I'm going to look back at that bio again. The cyber security from healthcare, cookbook. Yeah, there's all of these various interests that you not only have, but you have. The word is not indulged, engaged. You've engaged in. I think a lot of folks have different things they're interested in, and they'll say, I don't have time for that. It's too late. Uh, Honestly, I was surprised, and I hope this comes across as a compliment. I was surprised to hear that you were old enough to have grandchildren. Old enough. Now I'm hearing old enough to retire. This doesn't make sense to me. So you have more life experience, I think, than what I realized. How have you managed to do all of these things? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So I should probably preface everything with I'm not quite retirement age, but my husband is significantly older than me, and he was getting ready to retire. I'm just along for the ride. I,
Gotcha.
I
Okay.
I figured that I would move down here and we would both retire. We kind of had a plan of how we thought things were going to go. And of course, best laid plans, that whole idea. But retirement is not for me. That is not the life for me. I just cannot do it. I can't, even at this point, I can't imagine ever really retiring because I hesitate to say work, but I do love work. I get a lot of fulfillment from work. And even if that means like working in my garden, creating edible landscape, or working at conditioning myself for a 300-mile bike ride, like to me, that is work. And I still find a lot of fulfillment in that. I have no desire to sit in a cubicle and work, but pursuing other things, yes. If it falls into that realm of something that I'm interested in and passionate about, to me, that's still work.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense to me. When in the introduction, I threw a term in there, multi-potentialite, which is trying to remember who to give proper credit to for that. I'll put it in the show notes for folks who are listening because I want to give credit here. But to me, that was a good term to describe my own approach to life. And it sounds like to me it's something that you would relate to. I don't know if you've ever heard the term or not. You and I have grown up in an era where people were encouraged to specialize in something.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I tell folks, honestly, the reason I majored in journalism in college was it was as close as I could get to not declaring a major. Because, journalists by nature, what they do, we get to poke into all aspects of human existence, which is what I was interested in. Is this something you relate to, this idea of poking into all aspects of human existence?
Absolutely. And let me build on that. One of the terms that I've heard used lately is multidisciplinary.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And the example that I give when I talk to folks about this is, and nothing against hand surgeons, but would you rather be on the side of the highway with a flat tire with a car full of hand surgeons, or a various group of people who have diverse backgrounds? And the answer is, you want somebody who at least has some kind of a skill set to be able to reason through and problem solve how to change that tire. So
Hmm.
if I'm that person who is not specialized, where I'm multifaceted, I feel like I'm, for me and what I'm trying to do in my life, more able to survive and reproduce. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it just lends to my ability to get things done. But in terms of the way that my brain works, I there are things in this life that I love, like I just love the idea of, but it's beyond the idea of it being just a hobby. I almost have to devour it, right?
Mm.
So
Okay.
when I was switching, I say switching, but my primary focus, what was my bread and butter, was working in the therapy world in healthcare. But then I got this itch to learn about farming. And so I did all the things. I took classes, I entered a business competition, I surrounded myself with all like-minded people, flower farmers, beef farmers. I just wanted to know all the things. We hung out, I did interviews. I mean, it just trickled into other aspects of my life. Learning to be a better cook, losing weight, exercising, public speaking on things like, what does organic really mean, speaking on things like, what does GMO mean, how to be educated about it. And in that process, again, I just feel like I was devouring everything within that realm. And I noticed that the way that my mind works is, I'm not happy if I truly have an interest in something, I'm not happy just dabbling in it. Like
Mhm.
I have to know it. I have to be living, eating, breathing it all the time.
Okay. And again, that makes sense to me. One of the folks we mention on this program quite frequently is Joanna Penn. And Joanna, her approach is if she's learning something, she writes a book about it. And I'm wondering if that's similar. I know you've got a book out. You've got a couple others you're working on. You mentioned speaking. Is speaking kind of like that for you? That as you're digging into something, you start speaking about it?
Yes, very much so. I didn't start out feeling like I was going to be any kind of of a speaker, but what I've realized about myself along the way is that when I'm passionate about it, I absolutely want to share it with other people. I feel like I've spent a good part of my life in ignorance. You know, I call my generation, maybe your generation too, the fast food generation. I can remember going through McDonald's drive-through and being able to get hamburgers for 19 cents a piece and cheeseburgers for 29 cents a piece. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah,
and Taco
absolutely.
Bell was so cheap at that time, right? So we're kind of this fast food generation, and got away from really cooking, like really cooking, at least in my home, right? We still cooked and we still ate really good meals, but we really kind of moved forward to this fast food way of living. And then when my boys came along, I kind of raised them on fast food. It's easy, it's cheap, it was fast, there was no cleanup. So when I when I started when I started looking at food and things, I realized that it wasn't just me that had kind of lived in ignorance. That's just the way that we were raised. And so I began speaking about that to people. Like, there's a different way. We have to re examine this. We have to look at this again and question what we'd been taught.
Hmm, hmm. Okay, okay. And we're talking about food right now. Is that this is what led you uh, to write and publish a cookbook?
It is. It
And
is.
so let's talk about the cookbook a little bit. I love that title, Love and Butter. Okay. So what would you say is the theme of the cookbook? There
So the
may
theme,
not be
no,
one.
there is. There is. I'll just hold it up so people can get an
Yeah,
idea of
let me zoom in on it. There we go. Love and butter. Okay. Makes me hungry just looking at it.
it. Oh, there's some stories to tell about it as well. The theme,
Okay.
well, I didn't exactly start out wanting or with the goal to write a publishable cookbook. During my process, I realized that my grandparents really were the ones who had this figured out, right? We rarely went out to eat. Everything was cooked at home. Everything was cooked mostly from scratch. Very rarely was there any mix to anything, right?
Hmm.
But I was lamenting one day that all these recipes that my grandparents had made for me so lovingly and probably with real butter, real ingredients, they didn't write any of these down for me. And I kind of went through this phase of being a little bit angry, like, didn't they know that I was going to need these someday? And and it occurred to me that I also was not writing my recipes down for my boys. We, they would call up and say, "Hey, I'm bringing my friends over for supper tonight. Will you make whatever? Will you make, sometimes it would be, what do you want to have for Christmas dinner?" And it wouldn't be a traditional suggestion. It would be Navajo tacos. It would be lasagna, whatever, right?
Hmm.
So I started just keeping a journal, writing these recipes down, pulling out old recipes that I had perfected. And what I noticed is, as I organized them in this big binder, that I had, like, changed things, so many things along the way, marked out this particular ingredient, and or made notes in the margin, pulled out my favorite cookbooks, and noticed that I had been doing the same thing for decades. I'd been modifying them to my taste or the taste of my family. I'd been throwing in real ingredients to replace the fake things in them. And it occurred to me that I could make a family cookbook, right? I could leave this
Hmm.
for my kids. This would be my legacy. And as my interests in farming developed, I started working at a farmer's market, selling my produce at the local farmer's market. And in order to get people to come to my table, I started writing down recipes on cards and handing them out and just saying, good morning. are you interested in some squash? I have this great recipe here that you could try. And so that would get them to come over. I could have a conversation with them because 9 times out of 10 people would just pass me by. I was a small vendor. I didn't have the really big displays of all this fantastic produce that other vendors were getting from the bigger markets and bringing in. So I needed some kind of a hook to get them to come over and talk to me. And as that first season went by, people just kept saying to me, "Oh, I tried your recipe last week. You should write a cookbook."
Mm.
Well, I realized that I had one. It was
Mm.
that big binder of things that I was keeping for my kids. And that just kind of snowballed, and here we are. Love and
Okay.
butter. So the love piece of it is definitely there because of the way that my grandparents and my mom would cook for us. But I realized too that the things that my kids were asking for, tacos, Navajo tacos, egg rolls, just those things that they loved so much, I don't know that it was necessarily because those are fantastical recipes, though they're really, really good. I think it has something to do with intention. So my boys would say, "Mom, will you please make me tacos for dinner tonight?" And because they were asking me, I was cooking my intention. I was cooking love into
Mm.
that dish, and it was tasteable. It was it was something tangible.
Yeah.
And I see it even today. If I'm just cooking something, I'm just cooking something, right? But when I cook with intention and all of that love and thoughtfulness and genuine care and concern comes through, there's there's just something about it. Something
Yeah.
about it.
That makes perfect sense. Oh wow. You're going to be bringing the book out. I mean, it's published now. It's
It
not
is.
on Amazon at this point. I think you're going to
Correct.
have it on there in a few months.
Yes.
If folks wanted to get a copy of your cookbook, could they do so?
They absolutely can. Just email me and we'll decide how many you want and I'll get them in the mail and shipped right over to you.
Okay, and that personal touch is unusual these days. Folks who are with us on video, I've got Channie's email address going across the crawl. I'm going to say it out loud, but remember that you can always get the links at the show notes. The show notes are available at confidencecultivators.com, and the email address is ccm at ccmarstonandcompany.com. Now, this is like for several years here, I've been a reader of student names as they graduated at the college where I teach. And there was a guy that came across with one of those 17 syllable Eastern European names. He'd handed it to me on a card. I said, "How do you say that?" He said, "Just like it's spelled." But this is one of those that it really is just like it sounds here. C.C. Marston. Marston is Marston and company.com. But again, if you have any trouble with that, folks, just go to the show notes. You'll be able to follow a link and get there. So you've got other books that you've written or are in progress. I'm intrigued by the idea of a children's book and an older person's book. Um, there's so many questions that are coming together here, Channie. I can see going from therapy as a career into elder care. In between there, and let's explore this question first. In between there came this cybersecurity, and you didn't just, as you say, you didn't just do this as a hobby. I mean,
Right.
without getting into it right here, I can tell that you've been associated with a training company with this, and so how did the cybersecurity come in between there?
I I would love to tell you this story because it goes back a long way. My well, so when COVID hit, I I could not have paid someone to give me a job at that time. However, I did have a little part-time job in a nursing home setting, and without really going into it, all the things that happened during that time completely shifted the way that I thought about the industry. So my care and love and concern was still there for my patients who I provided therapy for, but I realized pretty quickly that I had to get out of the industry. I was no longer willing to tolerate some of the things that I was seeing and experiencing because that made me just as complicit as everyone else.
Mm.
So I took a little bit of a hiatus. That was a tough time for everyone, but I actually went to work in the school district so I could be a little closer to my daughter. So I was I say just, but we're invaluable, a substitute teacher, a
Mm-hmm.
teacher's aide. And that lasted for a couple of years. But in the meantime, my very best friend of 35 years, 40 years, more than half my life, had been bugging me for decades to go into business with him. He just has such a beautiful mind, and I'm a really good worker bee. I'm really good at research and writing and just getting stuff done, right? If it's on my to-do list, I'm getting it done. Anyway, so I was debating on if I should go back to work for the school district, and he's like, "What are you doing? Like this is the perfect time for us to go into business together." He's a cybersecurity expert with a training company, and he wanted to branch out and create something a little different, something newer. And I I jumped. I said, "Okay, let's do this. Let's do
Yeah.
this." So I spent a couple of years. We partnered together, did some really amazing things. I realized quickly though that I missed the people aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Cyber computers, things like that. It's very abstract, and the care and concern part of me, the giving the heart side of me, was not really being fed at that time. However, I came across a statistic during that whole experience that talked about the most vulnerable population to cyber attacks and hacks and abuse, cyber abuse, is to the elderly. And so I shifted my focus a little bit towards that, and how do I combat that, and how do I protect them, and how do I help them. And so I have since left cybersecurity because I'm on my own adventure here, but shifted my focus to prevention and education for how seniors can protect themselves. These hackers, they're so nefarious and wicked and evil,
Oh, yeah.
and I don't mean that lightly. That's a very serious situation, but they're so smart. They have targeted the most vulnerable technologically, and probably the wealthiest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really I can't talk about elder abuse in all of its typical forms that we hear about without also addressing the cyber abuse side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where my cybersecurity path led me over the couple of years, and just a summation on what I'm doing with it now.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. If you saw me smiling as you were talking about, at some point I had a smile and I thought, okay, that's going to look inappropriate. But the reason I was smiling is I've realized with a lot of the folks that I've talked with over the years, there will be things in their life that look disconnected, but there's always a thread there. And as you explained it, it makes perfect sense how this led to that, led to that. And
Yeah.
it's all based around serving what people need and something that you can provide for them. So that's just fascinating. Well, thank you.
You're
I've got a related question here. I've noticed in all the stuff that we've talked about, a lot of people get into gardening or farming without selling their stuff at a farmer's market. A lot of people pass on recipes to the family without publishing a book. You seem to kind of have an innate, I would call it a business sense. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you don't have an MBA. I don't know if you had ever any formal business training. It just seems natural to you. Um, First of all, you think that's an accurate observation? And secondly, how did you learn it? And third, what I'm really going to dig into here is it because you see business as, at its heart, a way of serving people? Now, that's a leading question, I know, but that's what I'm probing for. Because sometimes people will view business as just being cutthroat and taking advantage of people, and that's not you.
No, no. So yes, I would agree with you that I have an entrepreneurial mind and spirit. One of my personal life roles is that I feel like people should never pass by a child's lemonade stand without stopping. Even if you go around the corner and you're dumping that out, right? Because that so speaks to a child's isn't that the American dream? A
Mhm.
child's willingness to be entrepreneurial. So I yes, I definitely have that. But I think it goes back to something deeper than just wanting to help people. And it has to do with this hard life lesson I've learned, and it's that nobody is coming to rescue you. Nobody. You are your rescuer. And I've known people who've wasted a lifetime waiting around for someone to come and rescue them. It's not going to happen. I mean, we're not Julia Roberts, right? In Pretty Woman. That's a rare thing.
Yeah.
Very rare thing. You asked where that came from.
And let me
Well,
probe
go ahead.
just a little bit here, and tell me if I'm getting into any territory that you don't want to dig into too much. But you and I had a conversation at one point about how so many people who came from the reservation experience um, were schooled, for lack of a better term, to depend on somebody else. And I'm still fascinated by how you did not just fall into that same thing. What was different that led you to this insight that nobody is coming to rescue you? Does that kind of give a frame for what you're trying to talk about at this point?
It does. It does. So, just a few statistics about the area that I came from. Arizona is dead last in terms of education. Dead last. Arizona has a really high poverty rate, a little bit higher than the national average, but the Navajo reservation is much higher than the national average, which that should all be very questionable. Like, I would want to know why. And I do want to know why. I still want to know why. This is a conversation that I feel like needs to be had, specifically with people who are pro socialism. And I don't want to get too political here, but if there was a place in the US where socialism exists, it exists on the Navajo reservation. Free education, free housing, free food commodities. Lots and lots and lots of things are free, where you wouldn't expect there to be such a high poverty rate and for Arizona to come in dead last in terms of education. Everything is free. But I think if you look at it for what it is, it's all very poor. It's poor education, poor housing conditions. Everything is free. Well, I'm not going to say everything. A lot of things are free, and we are given a lot, but it is not high quality things. So in terms of being able to objectively look at that and say, this is not the life I want for myself. I want something better. You have to forego all the free and make different choices. Does that make any
Yeah.
kind of sense? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think more importantly, I believe it is encouragement to our audience, our listeners here. just that insight that nobody is coming to rescue you. Some might look at that and think, oh, well, that's kind of a negative point of view. I think it's the most positive thing that you can realize because it means that also you have control.
Hmm.
Oh, wow. So that's a great insight to bring out for our audience. Now, as I'm looking at the clock, it's a running joke here on the Alignment Show that ours is a half-hour program that runs about 45 minutes. So I'm mindful of your time and the audience. But before we get away, I want to look at what you're doing at this point. I know that you are close to, I think maybe you said this week that civic-minded.com will be going live. And I don't want to put time pressure on you because, if you need to kick that back next week or whatever, but we'll put it in the show notes, folks, but it's not live right now. What is civic-minded.com? What are you doing through that venture?
Well, here's my tagline.
Yeah.
I essentially champion with folks through this beautiful elderhood journey. That might sound very abstract, but I've been working on this for a couple of years now, trying to perfect it. But I have this dilemma, and this dilemma is all the stigma around aging that nobody wants to talk about. So the minute I say, "Oh, I'm a consultant for the elderly," they're gone. They're out. They don't want to talk about it. So I've been working to figure out a way to say to folks what it is that I do that doesn't include the word consulting or advising. However, I am just as important and relevant as any kind of financial advisor that you might seek advice from. I've been trying to figure out a way to convey the way that I feel about the elderly and the aged without saying the word elderly, because again, you say that and people, they're out. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to face it. And I get it. I get it. But that word elderhood, we have childhood, we have adulthood, we have older adulthood, but elderhood, whether it's a made up word or not, I feel like there's a little bit of a fun connotation to it, but it also kind of captures that there is still life and joy and fun and wisdom in being an elder. And I want to honor that in your elderhood. And just the idea that it is this beautiful journey. To me, elderhood is the most beautiful life stage. I want to I want to change things and celebrate 84 in the same way that we celebrate 4, with parties and pictures and just big celebrations. Why did we ever get away from that anyway? Why did we get away from, the little 4-year-old standing up there with his number 4? We should have the 84-year-old standing up there with an 8 and a 4. I just want to change the conversation and convey to people that there's still value and worth in us as we're old. We don't just have to reserve our, see, I'm getting emotional.
Yeah.
We
That's
don't have to
appropriate.
we don't have to reserve our love and value and the way that we honor folks for the young.
Do you think that because it's entirely appropriate that you would get emotional about this? It's something that matters deeply to you.
It does.
Does that come to some degree from your experience with a grandmother? Maybe, and this may be stereotypical, and tell me if it is, but my perception is that Native American culture honors their elders more than typical um, American culture does. I'm not quite sure how to put it, but does this fit?
Yes, it does. I should say too that I spent a lot of my formative years living with my grandparents on my mother's side, the Anglo side, but I also spent a lot of time with my Native American side. The difference, though, the standing in those two worlds, it's almost like, when I think back, it's almost like life on the res has not caught up with modern day societal beliefs.
Hmm.
And while I loved and lived with my grandparents and I learned a ton from them, it was very much in the modern world. My time on the reservation was very different, and I saw the way that elders are valued and kind of held in this sacred esteem, and how traditionally, because they that that culture was just not up with the signs that, up with the way that things are now in terms of culture and time. You really didn't see a lot of, they took care of their own. Like, you didn't see a lot of Native American elders, grandparents, in the nursing home setting. I think it's a little more now, just because of how things are. It's rough on the res, and so families want to make life easier for their elders. Some of my family members still do not have electricity or running water in their homes. They still live in a hogan with a dirt floor and a mud roof. And while those seem very primitive, it's still a hard life. I am grateful for having lived that way. I'm grateful for that experience. It was eye-opening, but the reality of it is it's simpler to live in town. It's easier to live in town, but
Yeah.
our lives aren't always set up that way. And we're seeing more of our Native American elders in the nursing home setting, but it's not a real common thing.
Hmm.
Mostly, though, I would have to say that I've always had kind of a soft spot in my heart for the elderly, and that probably goes right back to those two examples, my grandparents on both sides. But I'm I'm a little different, and I'm a little quirky. And the way that I relate with people and how silly I can be, I have found that the elderly are definitely more accepting of who I am at my core.
Mm.
And I was able to relate better with that population. And so I've over the years just numerous times said I was lucky enough to find my niche very early in life. I think that I'm
Mm.
a natural caregiver. I probably would have gravitated towards healthcare anyway, but I couldn't do pediatrics. Like, I don't have the same kind of connection with kids. I tried a little while in acute care. I did not have the same connection with adults my own age.
Mm.
I definitely have some intrinsic connection to the elderly. I love them. I just love them so much.
I'll
And
bet
they
you.
go ahead.
I'll bet you've been told that you are an old soul.
Yes. Over and over and over again.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I can see that. And on a semi-negative way, I relate on the kids thing. So there's a reason I taught college and not junior high. I would have killed somebody. Oh,
Well,
oh my.
you've heard that saying that the most vicious creature in the world is a middle school girl. Have you ever heard that before?
Oh yes, yes indeed. I have often said, I like, I don't know, 3 and 4 year olds. In fact, the first book I wrote was the way of the 3 year old why, because I love their curiosity and their openness. But I think about the time that they turn, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, we ought to nail them in a barrel and feed them through the bunghole until they turn 25. So that's another discussion, but I relate to that. I get along with older people better, and I think a lot of it is within you. I'm not going to take much time with this, but it just connects with something that just happened within the last day or so. Last night, I was taking care of our disabled daughter. I had already changed into night clothes. I wear an old fashioned night shirt. Okay. And my son and my wife came home and she dialed in and said, "Hey, I need help getting in." So I just went out to the car and she saw me coming out in my nightshirt, and she's thinking, what are the neighbors going to think, that kind of thing. And I said, one of the advantages of getting old, is I don't care what people think anymore. You
Well,
know,
there's a scientific reason for this. Do you know what it is?
what tell me about it.
As we age, the part of our brain that controls inhibition deteriorates.
Ah,
And
okay.
if I think about what you just said about you can relate to 3 and 4-year olds and then see why I can relate to the elderly, it's because we don't have those inhibitions yet, right? They develop at about what, 8, 9, 10 years old,
Hmm,
and
hmm.
you have that up through. So you, I would guess, can appreciate the honesty, the curiosity, just the being genuine of a 3 and 4-year old and an elderly person, right? And you didn't
Yeah.
care because that part of your brain is deteriorating right now.
Along with other parts, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Oh my goodness. Um, Shanny, as we're wrapping up here, I always like to end with this question. There's the people I talk with. There's so much we could dig into. There's probably something that you wish that I had asked that I didn't. What would that be, and what would your answer to that be?
Well, I'll preface it and say it has to do with my entrepreneurial spirit. And I would
Mhm.
love for you to have me back on at another point so we can just
Yes.
delve into that. And how, like, the things that have happened to me over the years that made me the big buzzword right now is breaking generational curses. Like, how did I get from there to here? Like, what were those aha moments or pivotal moments that made me think differently? How did I get here? So at some point, let's talk about that.
Yeah,
But
yeah. That's
honestly,
a whole episode there, I think.
it
Yeah,
is. It
yeah.
really is. It really is. But honestly, I you're it's easy to talk to you, and I feel like we could just go on and on about all of these things. But let me think real quickly.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to say to the audience, folks, as soon as I turn off the camera here, we're going to go ahead and schedule Channy for another session because I've got some openings coming up. So.
I would just say that just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. And couple that with the idea that while I love giving grace and I love being the recipient of grace, I think sometimes we let other people off the hook when they really need to be held accountable for what they did or how they are. So, for example, you hear, well, I'm sure your parents did the best they could with what they had. I don't always agree with that.
Mm.
And bringing that back to rescuing your own self, it would be really easy to say, well, that's how I was raised. That's the way my mom did it. That's how I was raised. And look how I turned out. I turned out just fine. I could continue to do it that way. I wanted to be different. And I knew that if I wanted a different life, I had to rescue my own self.
Yeah, yeah. Very insightful. Seriously, we want to dig more into that. So we're going to get you scheduled for another one here.
I would love it. I would love it. I'd be honored.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and we're going to wrap up this week. So if you'll hang out in the green room for just a moment, we'll take care of that and I can thank you properly. But thank you for being here with us this week. This has been fascinating. So
My
thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you very much.
So I'll be back with you in just a second. I'll tell folks about what's coming up next week on the Alignment Show. If you followed the show, you may be able to tell that we have, I don't know, some patterns, I guess you would say. Um, I'm coming into some patterns here where folks that I have met locally, I'm getting to have these conversations with, and the one that's coming up next week is a local author, local to me, by the name of Vince Vaughter. But some of you may recognize the name because he wrote a Newbery Award winner. He has worked all over the Southeast as a newspaper reporter. And he's settled right here in our little town of Maryville, Tennessee. So we're going to have a conversation with Vince next week. We're not primarily talking to writers, but we do talk with writers a lot because I think writers, by virtue of what we do, dig into what are the important things in our lives. And so that's going to be coming up next week on the Alignment Show. Remember, we always are seeking to live your values so you can value your life. That's what we're all about here. That's what our conversations are about. And we will be continuing with that next week right here on the Alignment Show. That's it for this week's episode of the Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.